This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry to review implementation of Farm Bill conservation programs will come to order. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone and thank you all for joining us today as we review USDA's implementation of the 2018 Farm Bill conservation programs. In 2018, this committee reauthorized the Farm Bill and amended several of the conservation programs. Farmers in my district in Central Virginia know how important these conservation programs are because they use them to boost soil health, improve water quality, protect wildlife habitat, and reduce soil erosion. And by doing so, they can improve their crop quality, increase their crop yields, all while better adapting to and mitigating the impacts of climate change. So we are now a year in, and we're watching as those conservation programs take shape. And I've been glad to see an increased focus on important issues like soil health, water quality, and water supply. Specifically in the area of soil health, the Farm Bill boosts incentives for soil health practices like cover cropping, crop rotation, and advanced grazing systems, all of which are utilized in my Central Virginia district. And a new soil health demonstration trial provides financial assistance for soil health and carbon-related practices, continuing efforts to test new and innovative conservation approaches. One of the advancements made in the 2018 Farm Bill was the encouragement of conservation strategies at the local and regional level. You can appreciate how important that is to my district in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and districts across the country. Our farmers in Virginia know that our farmers in Virginia know what works for their land and for their ecosystems, the land that they've operated for generations, and they know it far better than anyone else. Through voluntary conservation programs like the ones we'll talk about today, they're given more of a role in helping to expand clean water and soil strategies in their own operations. Now, our focus should be on implementation and watching to see what's working and what, if any, barriers there are to making sure that each of these programs is operating in a way that is consistent with what this committee intended when it wrote the bill and what the overall goals of the programs are. I look forward to receiving a candid look at those efforts as well as a discussion of the agency's rulemaking process. But when we talk about implementation, we must also talk about the staff doing the implementing. Programs, no matter how good they are or no matter how noble their goals may be, will only ever be as good as the people delivering them. And because of that, it's extremely important that both NRCS and FSA are operating at full staff to achieve program benefits. And in that regard, there are some serious questions about the ability of other USDA agencies to retain and empower staff to achieve their mission. And I want to ensure that that isn't an issue at NRCS and FSA. Furthermore, it's just as important that NRCS and FSA staffers are enabled and equipped by their agencies to deliver these programs in a manner that is consistent with what we want them to achieve. And that means consistent and genuine engagement with farmers and landowners on the ground. We're not here today to challenge the administration, bash the administration, nor are we here today to greenwash the efforts already underway. We're here for an honest look at where we stand, what's working, what needs more time, and I look forward to hearing ideas from USDA and from my colleagues on how we do just that. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member, the distinguished gentleman from California, Congressman LaMalfa.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning. Thank you, panelists. I appreciate you, Chair Spanberger, for calling this hearing today to update and review on the implementation of these important conservation programs in the Ag Improvement Act of 2018. So over the course of 2019, we heard from many producers about the benefits of the conservation and the assistance they received from the programs. I heard about of many of the innovative conservation practices that California producers are implementing. We have among many crops, 500,000 acres of rice in the northern part of the state, which is ideal for some of the habitat and conservation we're talking about, including building healthy soils through cover cropping and reducing inputs through the use of precision agriculture are some of these practices. Additionally, when the subcommittee reviewed the USDA programs last spring, we did receive a good update from USDA. We look forward to hearing more about the progress USDA is making in implementing 2018 Farm Bill conservation programs today. Congress has prioritized voluntary, incentive-based conservation programs, which have achieved good bang for the buck over the years. and certainly over the last several farm bills, helping farmers and ranchers reduce soil erosion, protect wetlands and wildlife habitat, and improve water quality and quantity. In an effort to modernize the delivery of these programs, the 2014 Farm Bill made significant reforms, consolidating over 20 conservation programs into 13 while preserving the fundamental goals of these conservation programs. In writing the 2018 Farm Bill included efforts by the House Ag Committee to build upon these successes by streamlining, simplifying, and improving program administration. We also fought to protect mandatory funding in the conservation title. The 2018 Farm Bill includes more flexibility in the delivery of CSP, a significant increase in funding for both EQIP and ASAP, the establishment of conservation incentive payments, and separate funding allocation for RCPP, as well as an increase in the acreage cap for CRP. In addition to these improvements, we made significant investments in infrastructure, emphasized the protection of drinking water sources, created the feral swine eradication and control pilot program, and expanded conservation innovation grants, the CIG. I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish as a committee, and I'm very proud of the farmers and ranchers who voluntarily participate in these conservation programs to preserve not only their land, but also their way of life. So thank you to our panelists again for being here today. Chief Lohr and Administrator Fordyce for taking time to update us. And thank each of you and your teams for the technical support that was essential to writing the Farm Bill and then ultimately helping the people in the field to implement it. So thank you, Chair Spanberger. I'll yield back.
In consultation with Ranking Member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. I'd now like to recognize Ranking Member Conaway for an opening statement. Thank you. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I would like to welcome our witnesses today. Thank you very much for being here. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Mr. Matthew Lohr, the Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service at the United States Department of Agriculture. As Chief, Mr. Lohr provides leadership for NRCS and its mission to support America's farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners in their conservation efforts. Mr. Lohr is a fellow Virginian and a fifth-generation farmer. And prior to NRCS, Mr. Lohr served as Virginia's Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and in the Virginia House of Delegates. Since 2017, he has farmed full-time on his family's operation, which includes poultry, beef cattle, row crops, and sweet corn. Our next and final witness is Mr. Richard Fordyce, the Administrator of the Farm Service Agency at the United States Department of Agriculture. As FSA Administrator, Mr. Fordyce provides leadership for FSA and its mission to support agricultural production across America through a network of over 2,100 county and 50 state offices. Mr. Fordyce is a fourth-generation farmer from Bethany, Missouri, and previously served as the State Executive Director for FSA in Missouri and as Director of the Missouri Department of Agriculture. We will now proceed to hearing from our witnesses. Each of you will have 5 minutes to present testimony. When the light turns yellow, that indicates there is 1 minute left to complete your testimony. Chief Lohr, please begin when you are ready.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger. I'm one of those proud Virginia farmers you mentioned in your opening comments, so it's an honor to be here. Chairman Peterson, Ranking Members Conaway and LaMalfa, and members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to testify today on USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Services, the programs that we deliver through conservation. I know I speak for Secretary Perdue and Undersecretary Northey when I say that we appreciate the ongoing efforts of this subcommittee for voluntary private lands conservation and the improvement of our natural resources. We're also grateful for the committee for providing us the authority to implement our programs in 2019 through existing regulations. Since we visited last May, NRCS has been working hard to implement our Farm Bill programs. I'm pleased to report that as of today, 3 of our 4 Farm Bill interim rules have been published, including the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ASEP, Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. We've also published a miscellaneous rule that strengthens and streamlines our services delivered through the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, as well as expands the membership of our state technical committees. I'm also pleased to announce that last night we got clearance from OMB on the interim rules for our final Farm Bill program, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP. I know there's been a lot of anticipation around this announcement, so the rules are being sent to the Federal Register today, and they should be published early next week for public comment. Following the publication of each of our interim rules, we invited agriculture and conservation stakeholders to our headquarters and held meetings to discuss the changes made to the programs. These meetings have been very constructive, and the feedback has been positive. So far, we've received over 100 public comments to our CSP interim rule, expressing a desire for program support for both existing and new conservation activities. We expect to review our comments in response to EQIP and ASIP later this winter. And following the public comment for each of these interim rules, we will immediately begin developing final rules to publish sometime later in 2020. As we continue making progress towards full implementation, I wanted to highlight just a few of our 2019 accomplishments. $300 million was invested and made available under RCPP. $37.5 million was announced for the feral swine control pilot program in partnership with USDA's APHIS. $37.5 million was made available for both our Conservation Innovation Grants, or SIG, and the new SIG Innovation On-Farm Conservation Trials. Under CSP, our funds were used to cover 6.3 million new acres, bringing the total program acres to 53 million across 60,000 contracts. And EQIP financial assistance obligations totaled over $1.2 billion for over 41,000 active contracts covering an estimated 13 million acres. As all of us know, 2019 was filled with numerous disasters all across the nation. Through our Emergency Watershed Protection Program, or EWP, we provided over $330 million in assistance to communities through recovery payments and floodplain easements. Also, through our EQIP emergency funding, we provided $62 million in assistance to farmers, ranchers, and private forest landowners. I would also mention that last Friday, we launched the Conservation Assessment and Ranking Tool, or CART. Throughout 2020, our staff will be working hard with customers throughout the country to utilize this tool, which will help assess land conditions and resource concerns. The designs and improvements made by this tool will certainly enhance our customers' experience and streamline the application process over all of our programs, saving a significant amount of staff time each year. We recognize that we had challenges last year administering producer payments through CSP, but as a result of those challenges, we have begun revamping our internal processes to ensure that payments can be delivered efficiently and timely. As chief, I'm committed to making timely producer payments a top priority, and will continue to evaluate and make appropriate changes moving forward. Throughout 2019 and to now, balancing Farm Bill implementation with our program delivery has certainly been a heavy lift, but we could not have done it without the support of Undersecretary Northey and his team at the Business Center. His leadership has enabled us to advance our coordination efforts with the Farm Service Agency and the Risk Management Agency. NRCS and FSA continue to work very closely and collaboratively to address our customer concerns, especially in the delivery of the Conservation Reserve Program, and provide excellent customer service to producers all across the nation. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my opening statements. I look forward to sharing more with you in the committee and certainly welcome your questions. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Chief Lohr. We appreciate your comments. Administrator Fordyce, you may begin.
Thank you. Chairman Peterson, Ranking Member Conaway, Madam Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to be with you this morning. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you and represent FSA. The 2018 Farm Bill provided for some of the most extensive changes to FSA conservation programs in recent history. We are dedicated in our outreach to ensure producers understand the many options they have to benefit from these programs. As we implemented the Farm Bill provisions, FSA made administrative decisions that prioritize the conservation goals of the programs and would not adversely impact new farmers and ranchers who are critical to the future of American agriculture. Our decisions were fact-based, data-driven, and customer-focused. 2020 marks the 35th anniversary of the Conservation Reserve Program. The tens of millions of acres farmers and ranchers have chosen to enroll under CRP since 1985 provide a variety of conservation and economic benefits. Currently, at 22 million acres, CRP is one of the largest private lands conservation programs in the U.S. The 2018 Farm Bill authorized 27 million acres by 2023, which means continued successes like preventing more than 9 billion tons of soil from eroding, enough soil to fill 600 million dump trucks, protecting more than 175,000 stream miles, enough to go around the world 7 times, and increasing populations of birds and other wildlife. After updating rental rates and publishing our regulation in December 2019, we were able to open sign-up for both general and continuous CRP. This includes the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. We reminded producers today that we are only 1 month from the end of the general sign-up, which is now an annual competitive opportunity for producers, where offers will continue to be ranked based on environmental factors. We set this deadline to ensure decisions on acceptance are made in early spring prior to planting, so farmers and ranchers can use best management practices on that ground in preparation for CRP. A separate CRP grassland sign-up will follow general sign-up annually, which will run from March to May this year. The ongoing continuous sign-up continues to target high-priority conservation practices and now focuses primarily on water quality practices prioritized in the 2018 Farm Bill under the Clean Lakes, Estuaries, and Rivers Initiative, or CLEAR. Producers will also have the opportunity to re-enroll CLEAR practices in a 30-year CRP contract for the first time under the new CLEAR 30 pilot, which will be announced later this spring. We also anticipate announcing soon the Soil Health and Income Protection Pilot Program, or SHIP, in the Prairie Pothole region of the country. For producers that have CRP contracts nearing expiration, we encourage them to re-enroll in one of these sign-up options or take advantage of expanded options under the CRP Transition Incentives Program, or TIP. With $50 million available under the 2018 Farm Bill, TIP now allows all contract holders with expiring CRP acres the opportunity to transition land to a beginning, veteran, or socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher to return land to production. FSA also has funding tools for farmers and ranchers who implement conservation practices through guaranteed conservation loans. And for those that qualify, our more traditional direct and guaranteed loan programs may be a funding option. Our efforts to implement conservation programs could not be realized without talented and dedicated staff. The additional appropriations from Congress for staff and direct hire authority from the Office of Personnel Management are helping us help our staff, who in turn help America's farmers and ranchers. And as I bring my comments to a close, sitting next to my colleague and former farmer, Chief Lohr, I want to emphasize that FSA continues to strengthen our relationship with NRCS and the Risk Management Agency in the Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area. We work very closely with NRCS on CRP and our other programs in our nearly 3,000 offices and communities nationwide, and through the outreach that we provide to our producers, which is unparalleled. Together, our conservation programs make up a tremendous toolkit that USDA provides to America's primary land stewards and drivers of our agricultural commodity, the U.S. economy, the U.S. farmer and rancher. Information about all of our programs is available at farmers.gov. Thank you again for this opportunity to update on the implementation of the 2018 Farm Bill. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my statement, and I will be happy to answer your questions and those of the other subcommittee members.
Thank you very much for your comments today. We appreciate them on this very, very important topic. Members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I would like to first begin by recognizing Chairman Peterson of the full Agriculture Committee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlelady, for recognizing me. Chief Lohr, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago before this, but I never heard in that meeting anything about this ranking thing that you, what did you call it?
The CART, Conservation Assessment and Ranking Tool?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So where did that come from?
So, Mr. Chairman, this has been an idea that's been in the works for many years as a way how we can streamline our programs and our processes, because as you know, we offer a variety of Farm Bill programs, and many times it's very cumbersome for a producer to know which program would make the most sense. And ranking different programs have different ranking techniques. So CART is a tool that's been developed for the last several years, but the goal is to have one center piece of technology where one of our employees can work hand in hand with the producer, identify their farm, get the farm information inputted, look at all of the resource concerns that they have, that information's inputted, look at what programs we have, what pieces of technical assistance we can provide. All of that gets inputted into the computer software, and then it will actually do an assessment on which practices would be the most beneficial to affect that operation, and it'll automatically rank them for which program would be the best fit for that.
So in other words, you don't need the people in the county offices anymore?
No, there's still going to be much work for our employees.
Well, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
give me this streamlining this, you know, it's just, this is more bureaucracy. You know, I don't see that it's going to do any good other than give people a chance to come in and lobby your department, come up with more damn crazy regulations that are going to screw things up, like what you're doing with CRP and your EBI. You know, I just think that this is going the completely wrong direction, to have some kind of a, you know, top-down deal. I mean, it's just, I don't know. That's the first time I've heard of this. I don't think my staff's heard about it either, yesterday. You say it's been going on for years?
No, actually, we just rolled the program out last Friday.
Yeah, but you said you were working on this for years?
So a goal of the agency, certainly even a goal of Secretary Perdue, is how we can better streamline our programs to make them more efficient. We all have participated in government programs, and one of the complaints by producers is the red tape and the amount of paperwork and the redundancy. So,
So are people going to come in here and put things into this system that are going to drive what kind of things happen?
no,
Or
sir.
is this going to be neutral in that stuff?
No, sir, yeah. So we're still accomplishing the same end goal of helping producers match their resource concerns with the proper assistance that's needed in the proper Farm Bill programs. This is just a way to make the process easier.
But that's what was going to be, the EBI is going to try to figure out what most of the most environmentally sensitive land was, and then, you know, people came in and lobbied and got all this stuff put in there. We ended up spending $600 an acre planting, you know, these crazy mixtures that they've got and so forth. I just have no confidence that that's not going to be the end result of this kind of a system.
Well, I can assure you.
You've got a
that's-
bunch of work to do to convince me that this is a good idea, so.
Yes, sir. Well, it's debuting in our offices this week, and be happy to come back and give you an update on the progress and the success of the program.
Yeah,
So
we'll better do that. Thank you, lady.
I now recognize Ranking Member Conaway of the full Agriculture Committee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Fordyce, on the rental rates for CRP, can you talk to us about the criterion for setting up those rates? Because we're getting some differences between neighboring counties, and obviously farmers talk to each other, and it creates a ruckus. Can you give us some insight into how that's coming about?
Absolutely. We start with the NAS cash rent survey that NAS does every year to gauge what the rental rates are in that particular county. And then there is a proration. General CRP is prorated at 85% of that cash rental rate from the NAS survey. Continuous is prorated at 90% of that. I would say that once the rental rates are posted, counties driven by the locally elected county committee can submit an opportunity to adjust those rates, and we do have a formula in place that allows them to readdress those if they see that they're disparate, say, compared to a neighboring county.
So but if the NAS data is wrong in your analysis, I mean, if you've got counties side by side, there shouldn't be market differences between the two. If I could, I'd get my team and I to work with you on the specific counties in District 11 that are giving me the most issue about with this, the most heat about this issue. We'd work with you on that, find out why that's happening.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there shouldn't be, the goal in the 18 Farm Bill was to lower rental rates to be more reflective of the market, but some of these were set at levels that got the farmers back home scratching their heads over it. So we can work with you on that?
Yes, absolutely, sir. We
Okay.
would be more than happy to work with you on the processes that we're currently utilizing. And again, the counties do have an opportunity to I guess the word is appeal.
Appeal, okay.
And we do have a process by which we follow.
All right. And the other thing, Chief, we're keenly interested in the implementation of the feral swine eradication program, your pilot projects. Could you give us some specifics on, I thought you said 37 million was made available. Can you talk about the specific projects that might be, that we can look forward to seeing the results of?
Yes, sir. And in my travels throughout the Southeast, primarily, hardly a trip goes by without someone mentioning the impact of feral swine. The Farm Bill gave $75 million that was split between us and APHIS, so we have $37.5 million. Our goal was to take half of that money in year one and then half of that money in year two and work with partners to be able to put some pilot programs together, delivering the money in the first 2 years. We would have several years to assess the impact and hopefully see what the successes can be. So we targeted 10 states, primarily from Oklahoma, Texas, all the way around the Southeast up to North Carolina. These were the states that had the highest percentage of feral swine infestation. Our APHIS state director and our NRCS state coordinator worked together with the state technical committees. They identified pilot programs or pilot projects in each of those 10 states. And then they applied, and then we selected, I think there were 18 areas that were selected, 10 pilots were selected, and then they've begun to start putting their proposals together. So from NRCS's point of view, we are focusing on the trapping of feral swine. And so most of these proposals are going to focus on surveillance equipment and cameras and the actual monitoring, and then be able to see how collaboratively they can come together to try to get a handle on feral swine. Some of the projects are going to be focusing on doing videos, maybe training videos to help other people once they gather some of these successes that they can share with other farmers to see what would be the most beneficial going forward. So we're well underway. Like I said, we've got half of the money that's been obligated. We've got the partners in place. They put their proposals together, and we're anxious to see them get started and see what successes we can find.
Well, thanks for getting the quick start on that project, and because you had a lot to get done, both of you guys did, and appreciate that. So, Chairman, you go back.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chief Lohr and Administrator Wotus, again, thank you for being here. We've got a number of members who are coming and going from multiple committee hearings, so thank you for your patience and thank you for your presence here today. I wanted to first ask about the implementation of some of the significant changes to the Farm Bill. Staff at USDA are working to implement these changes to the conservation programs made in the 2018 Farm Bill. And my question is, how are you all engaging with producers at the various state levels regarding sign-up timelines? Are you meeting with groups on a monthly basis? And if not, what are the meeting schedules that you are carrying out, and what can you commit to going forward?
Well, thank you for the question, and certainly outreach and the ability to communicate all of the opportunities that we have to offer under our conservation programs is critically important. We have, in every state, we have a dedicated outreach and public affairs coordinator that works individually with county offices, and we find that certainly we can have larger statewide meetings with stakeholders, but a lot of times that outreach and that communication works really best at the local level. And so I can get for you, I don't have the number, but I can get for you the number of outreach kind of meetings, town halls, meetings in which our local staff, so folks on the ground that understand the needs of the local producer and landowner have undertaken. But it's quite numerous because, as you can imagine, with a new, just CRP, for example, with a new general sign-up and some of the things that are offered through the continuous sign-up, lots of questions and certainly lots of interest.
I would be interested in receiving that as follow-up, so thank you for offering it. You know, my focus really here is ensuring that localities and communities across Virginia and across the country have access to the information so that they can be as responsive as possible and make sure that they know about these programs and are meeting the timelines. And Mr. Fordyce, you had mentioned that your staff is the staff that helps America's farmers and ranchers, and I appreciate that understanding of kind of how you view your workforce. And Congress has invested significant resources into these conservation programs. We've also raised the NRCS staff ceilings and provided FSA funds to hire additional field staff to efficiently administer the programs, with an eye towards meeting producer needs and conservation goals. So can both of you talk through your plans and timelines for hiring staff, NRCS field staff, and when can producers in my district expect to have additional NRCS and FSA staff on board?
Very good, thank you. And please know that for both of us, staffing is one of our top priorities to make sure we have enough employees in the field being able to service the needs of our producers. So very quickly, we're about 8,800 employees right now at NRCS, and we've been given a ceiling cap of about 10,445. So we have a tremendous opportunity to bring a lot of new employees into the field. And for NRCS, we have a targeted three-pronged approach, one focusing on the Pathways program, the student intern program. We drive a lot of our employees that go through this program. Right now, we've made 569 offers to college students. Right now, 450 have been selected that will intern with us next summer. And the thing about Pathways, when you do 2 summers, 640 hours, and you have an automatic conversion into being a full-time employee. So we put a lot of emphasis into that program, gives them the opportunity to see who we are. Second one is our direct hire authority, which we're very appreciative for OPM for giving us 273 positions in about 25 states focusing on disaster work and farm bill implementation. We're working very aggressively to meet that obligation we have for those positions, but we certainly appreciate the flexibility, being able to work at a local level to get those right folks in place. And finally, for us, we realize that if we're going to make progress in our staffing numbers, we need to focus on those entry-level positions that are the most farmer-facing, our soil conservationists and soil contexts, our soil scientists, the ones in our district offices. So we're putting an emphasis on allowing our states to put that as a priority to make sure we can have folks that are coming into the agency that are going to be the ones that are working most directly with our farmers. So we have an aggressive timeline. Our hope is that by probably May, we should have an additional 500 employees that we'll have on staff. So the employees or the farmers in your district hopefully will see some new faces pretty soon. And then once we get them hired, we have processes to train them and mentor them to help sure they're being effective. Apologize if I took all of the administrator's time. So
thank you. We will be doing a second round of questions. So I'll, out of respect for my colleagues' time, we'll process through and I'll get back to you, hopefully, Mr. Fordyce, when we come back to it. I now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Administrator, I'd start with you. Of course, you know how incredibly wet the last year has been in South Dakota, not just in South Dakota, but really the entirety of the northern Great Plains, it seemed like. And as producers try to grapple with how best to deal with that land resource on a go-forward basis, one would think CRP would play a big role, would be an important tool in the toolbox. The producers that are talking to me are mindful, of course, that in the 2006 CRP, only 2 contracts were signed in South Dakota. As we look toward signups in the future, how optimistic should they be that CRP is a worthwhile tool that will be available to them?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say that farm country, there are a lot of those kind of decisions that are being made, right? You know, as a farmer, I am always trying to understand what those decisions are. And you mentioned the 2016 sign-up where there were only 2 contracts taken. I think, you know, if I were to answer that as to why that was, we were very close to bumping up against the cap. And so the level at which we were accepting contracts, the bar was set fairly high. The current sign-up certainly is a competitive sign-up, and we'll have to see what kind of offers we get and at what level do we set that bar of accepting contracts. So I do believe, though, that you're absolutely correct that CRP could be an option for some of these areas that have seen some real weather weather impacts.
So let's talk with some additional specificity about what might change. Of course, the EBI tool you all use to do the evaluation is the same. You know, the cap was raised in the Farm Bill, but are the prospects dramatically different in the future than they were in the recent past, do you think?
Well, I would just answer that by saying that certainly there is an increase in the cap, and we do have a good number of acres that are expiring by the 1st of October of this year, of 2020. So there's going to be more room than there was in that 2016 sign-up.
So if we could talk a little bit, gentlemen, about pheasants. Of course, we all know that many producers across the country are looking more and more to diversified ag. I guess they're looking back again to diversified ag as an important risk mitigation tool, buy down some volatility. And in South Dakota, pheasants, that's an important part of the diversification story. I'm just curious if we can get an update on progress as we move toward some of the working lands conservation, some of the grazing conservation. Where are we at with that?
So certainly, both of our agencies support habitat, and certainly pheasants are a major part of that, especially in your neck of the woods. So we continue to do work. We have Farm Bill biologists through Pheasants Forever, contract positions that work with us in our offices that continue to help provide guidance to producers. Through several of our programs, the Working Lands for Wildlife program, as you know, also allows farmers to be able to be paid to put habitat practices on their operation that can enhance habitat like for pheasants and quail. So definitely I know with our agency that remains a top priority as we go forward in the new Farm Bill, and being able to help producers be able to be compensated for addressing those habitat concerns for birds like pheasants.
Well, I know anytime you get a new Farm Bill, of course, there are 100 things that have to be done immediately, but do we have some sense of when producers might be awarded contracts for the, CRP grazing land? Or rather, the CRP grasslands program?
So the CRP Grasslands program sign-up will run almost right after the general sign-up comes to an end, and that's February 28th. So CRP Grasslands sign-up will start March 16th and run through May 15th. And we hope to have folks notified by early summer of their acceptance into the CRP Grasslands program.
Well, I would just add, Madam Chair, for our two witnesses as well as for yourself, if anybody ever wants to come shoot some ringnecks, let me know. I'll make sure we have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Axney of Iowa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Dusty, I'll tell you what, we'll have to fight for that because, we got a lot of pheasants in Iowa, too. So anyhow, Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you so much for having this hearing on the implementation of the conservation programs. Thank you, Chief Lohr and Administrator Fordays for being here. My home state, as you're probably fully aware, is the largest recipient of conservation program enrollment in the country, so I appreciate the work that you do to help us with that. Thanks so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about flooding, because I'm sure you all know that we're still suffering in Iowa. But I'd like to also thank the USDA for the prompt reply to my request from Secretary Perdue for the status update on those flood recovery funding that's been allocated to Iowa. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure you know, as I mentioned, that Southwest Iowa had our devastating flood last spring. We're expecting, of course, to see more flooding this spring because of the runoff and certainly a lot of precipitation on the ground, and we've still got a lot of levees that need repairs. But the recovery has been long and arduous. Many expressions from Iowans are that they're really frustrated with the inability to get the funding that they need as quickly as they would like to from the different agencies. So to help with that and to provide some transparency, I started an Iowa flood funding tracker to make sure that the money that we appropriated for the Midwest floods is actually getting out to the flooded areas. And I've asked multiple federal agencies involved to provide specific answers related to that. So thank you for giving us the information we needed. Please help us continue to keep that updated as you put more funding towards the recovery process in Iowa. So, of course, my first question is related to the disaster that we're still seeing. Many Iowans have taken advantage of the Emergency Conservation Program, which provides financial and technical assistance to farmers whose land has been damaged to help restore their land. But Administrator Fordays, what kind of outreach, and I'm asking for outreach in particular, not us going and our folks having to go and ask for the support, but outreach does NRCS do on these programs when a natural disaster hits? And then the second question would be, how are local communities made aware of the assistance that's available through ECP?
So I am very aware of your situation. I'm just, my farm is just 18 miles from the Iowa line, not in the Missouri River flooded areas, but certainly a lot of friends have been impacted by that as well. And so, you know, again, as we talk about outreach and we talk about how do we communicate those things that are available, we have, and I'll probably mention this quite a bit during the hearing, the opportunity to really commend our staff that are on the ground, whether it's the executive director within the county executive director, or the program technicians that are there, have great relationships with the local producers and landowners. Constantly refer to those farmers and ranchers and landowners in their county as their farmers. And so there's a great deal of outreach and communication at the local level, and certainly from a state level as well, working with stakeholders, whether it's commodity organizations, farm groups, and others, to be able to get the word out about those kind of programs that are available.
Okay, so basically just through local folks on the ground. Is there any other way that people can
and
get what
partnering
they
with
need?
stakeholders? That's another key way that we can communicate those messages out.
Okay, okay. Is there anything else you think that you could be doing to help with this process?
Well, I know we communicated. We had a couple of calls with you to talk through the ECP and the other programs. You know, as part of the disaster funding, there was a component of on-farm stored grain that's not directly related to ECP, but it was a program that we administered, and I believe Iowa was the largest recipient of that program. Over $3 million went to producers that had grain that was damaged and literally washed away. That was, I think, certainly very meaningful dollars to those producers that lost that grain.
Well, I appreciate that. I was able to get that statutory language changed to cover that uninsured grain and bin, so we really appreciate your help with that. We couldn't have made it happen. I do have some additional questions, but I'm running out of time, so I will wait for the second round.
I now recognize Congressman Schreier from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me to participate in today's subcommittee hearing. I'm not normally part of the subcommittee. I wanted to speak about an issue of critical importance in Washington State, and this is the status of the SAFE program, the State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement. Sage grouse are currently state listed as threatened, and sharp-tailed grouse are also state listed but as endangered. And their population estimates in 2019 were only 676 and 834 individuals respectively. Now, most of the habitat that is remaining to support prairie grouse in Washington State is on private lands, so these are our farmers. CRP and SAFE in particular is one of the only programs that's available to conserve this habitat at a meaningful scale and has been successful and probably is keeping these species off the endangered species list. So my question is to you, Administrator Fordays, can you speak to the decision to move SAFE acres within CRP general sign-up rather than on continuous sign-up as has historically been done? And my concern is that by moving it to general sign-up means there's a 10-year maximum contract length instead of 15, lower rental rates, and less allowance for incentive payments. And this makes it less likely that producers, farmers will apply for the SAFE program, and it puts these species at risk.
So good question. So moving SAFE to continuous, or to the general sign-up, I think the thought around that was that a lot of the state acres for wildlife enhancement covers are more grass-type covers, and opportunities for folks that want to participate in SAFE. Our general sign-up, our general practices have more of an opportunity for larger blocks of land as opposed to more resource concern focused areas. So moving SAFE to general, I think the general thought was that this would offer literally more opportunities for folks that wanted to engage and participate in SAFE, and also allows for even safe practices. Safe practices can also go in under continuous. Safe-like practices could go under continuous that would enhance wildlife habitat as well.
Can you tell me more about those safe-like practices that could be continuous? Because in our state, it turns out that we will exceed the maximum acreage, and so it's going to put these species at risk. So what are the other ways around this?
Are you referring to the 25%?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been communicating a great deal in the last probably 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks with the state executive director there about that, and what are opportunities for those areas of the state that are going to bump up or go over that 25% cropland limit. And so we've communicated what the process is for them to request a waiver. And that is in progress. As far as I know, we have not received anything at headquarters from them yet, but certainly we've talked about the process for a waiver for them to apply for.
That would be phenomenal. They would very much appreciate that, and I would like to stay in touch with you to make sure that I can facilitate that.
And I absolutely would offer the opportunity for us to stay in communication on this issue and work with our staff to see kind of what the progress is of that.
Okay, thank you. Also, Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to insert a copy of an article from the January 2020 issue of Wheat Life, which highlights this change and the implications and the impact on conservation for farmers in Washington State. Also, a letter sent by our state Fish and Wildlife Director and the Washington State Conservation Commission Director. And I'd like to submit a letter that was sent to me and Congressman Newhouse from the Foster Creek Conservation District.
So granted, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Administrator Fortes. I don't believe it was Congress's intent to halt safe exemptions when it passed the 2018 bill, and I'm happy to hear that there is an opportunity for a waiver that we can pursue. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now recognize Congresswoman Fudge for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. Chief Lohr, I'm sure you're aware that the urban agriculture movement has grown rapidly in Northeast Ohio, of course, where I'm from. In fact, the city of Cleveland is now recognized as having the second most active, successful U.S. urban agriculture movement in the United States. In my area of Cleveland, we have more than 120 seasonal high tunnel homes, which I'm sure you're aware.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to thank NRCS for programs and services and partnerships like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, because it does assist us in extending the growing season. And you know, right now it's very cold in Ohio. But I will say that I'm disappointed that the most recent announcement for Conservation Collaborative Grants funding did not include socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers and Black farmers in the definition of historically underserved farmers and ranchers. Could you tell me why?
So I will say, first of all, thank you for the efforts you've done and led in your district over the years. You have an amazing number of high tunnels that have been constructed and certainly serves as a blueprint for other urban areas. In the past, we did not have a structured process for administering grants to different types of groups, outreach grants. So at the urging of the secretary and the undersecretary, we wanted to try to make sure we could streamline that process, put a more structured process in place to make it more fair. So as part of that, we've set $35 million aside that we're going to be administering the opportunity closes soon, conservation and collaboration grants, and $10 million of that is aimed towards historically underserved.
But how could you be historically underserved if you're not socially disadvantaged? Please help me.
Well, Ma'am, in my opinion, that will certainly be included in that definition
But
of
it
historically
isn't
underserved.
included. The fact is, it is not included.
Okay.
Could you at least take a look at it?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, because when you don't include black farmers,
Sure.
I don't know who else you include.
Well, I can tell you that when I think of historically underserved, I certainly would include African Americans and other minority populations.
Let me just ask you, how many African Americans do you have in your leadership, either of you? Because I don't see any sitting in this room.
I don't know offhand, but there are several.
If they're in your leadership, you can just probably count them on your hand right now and tell me.
It depends on definition of leadership, but out of a team of 30, we probably have at least 10 or 12, I would say.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you send it to me?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It seems to me that the rules or the direction that you are going is really pushing minority farmers and community-based organizations out of conservation programs. So I'm certainly hopeful that you will take a look at where that is, and my office would be happy to have conversations with you about it. But it's just unfortunate to me that everything that I'm seeing out of this particular USDA either hurts poor people or people of color or hungry people. Even though your motto says we feed everybody, I don't know who those everybody's are because I don't see what you do. But I am hopeful that at some point you will recognize the fact that there are many underserved farmers in this country, including in cities like mine. Everybody thinks farming is solely rural. It is not. My children need healthy foods just like everybody else's children do in our schools. And so I just would like for you to get back to me with the questions that I've asked you.
Yes, ma'am.
And to at least consider the fact that what you have done is left out an entire group of people that through the Farm Bill and every other thing we have done, we have tried to lift. Now you are pushing them back down. I yield back.
If I could respond, I'd be happy to get you answers to your questions, ma'am, but I will say, I can promise you that as chief of this agency, it is not our intent to limit the opportunities to serve our underserved populations. And through our programs of EQIP, we have an advanced payment option where they can receive 50%
With all due
upfront.
respect, it probably isn't your intent, but that is in fact the effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the first round of questions completed and without objection, we will begin a second round of questions. Members will be recognized for 5 minutes in order of seniority. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chief Lohr, I understand that CSP had significant unused funding last year, and some of the changes being made to CRP are likely to going to score as saving money that should be reinvested in CRP. Both of these programs consistently have more producer interest than we have funding to support. Do you expect to fully spend the CSP carryover money this fiscal year? If so, how, and if not, why?
Yes, ma'am. So I will say CSP, one of the major changes from the 2014 Farm Bill to the 2018 Farm Bill is that before it was an acre-based program and it converted to a dollar-based program. Because of that transition, there were some carryover funds that we ended up having, ultimately about $100 million that we had in carryover money. The descriptions in the Farm Bill actually specify how that money is to be distributed. It actually goes back to the 2014 and 2015 contracts that were based of RCPP. This gets really wonky in the weeds, but the old RCPP was a donor-based program, so there were dollars that were contributed through the various programs. So starting in 2018 going forward, RCPP is a standalone program, but in the previous Farm Bill, CSP dollars were tied to some of these RCP projects. So the carryover money that we had from the 2014 Farm Bill will be directed towards funding the CSP through the RCP programs. Starting in 2018 going forward, since we have a dollar-based program, we will not have an issue with carryover funds anymore. So that's part of making the transition. The change of the program will eliminate the carryover situation that we had this past year.
So specifically, does that mean that we intend to see that money being used?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And just noting my concern is based on the fact that in 2016 CRP general sign-up, in that sign-up, only 22% of the acres offered were accepted. And as you well know, if we don't spend this money, we will have less money towards the baseline in the future. And that's our concern, that we are depleting this program by not actually allocating those dollars.
So I think we're blending programs. I was speaking to CSP, and I think CRP would be under my counterpart.
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Fordyce
Yes,
here,
sir.
So, sorry.
So, and I would answer the 22% of offers that were accepted in the 2016 Farm Bill. We've had a number of conversations about that with staff, and probably solely due to the fact of how close we were to hitting the acreage ceiling, the cap, and would be the main reason why that was a 22% acceptance.
And do you anticipate that those dollars will be spent, as we were discussing on the CSP side, with CRP as well?
So we will, once the general sign-up deadline is here, we will have all of those offers. They're ranked according to the EBI, and then we will make a determination as to what score we take as far as what's above the line or below the line. And as I had indicated earlier, we do have a lot more room under the cap, and so we'll have to wait until this sign-up is over and see what offers we get before I could answer that more closely, I guess.
Great, thank you. Well, I can't stress how important it is that producers have access to these vital dollars. Chief Lohr, our work to improve soil health in Virginia supports the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And NRCS has funded a number of projects related to soil health recently. What else are you doing in Virginia to support soil health and water quality? And how do you anticipate leveraging the next round of CSP and EQIP to further that work?
Absolutely, and I know we're limited on time, but I will say, first of all, soil health is a top priority. As chief this year, when I unveiled the top priority, soil health is certainly top of mind, and really it helps to make sure that we're making sure all of our employees understand the importance, our decisions, and the positive impacts they have. So training is a key component of that. We've got 27 trainings planned for 2020, both in person and through AgLearn, to make sure that all of our employees understand that soil health is key to every one of the decisions that they make. One of the cool things of the Farm Bill was the SIG on-farm trial, as you mentioned, and $10 million of that is dedicated towards the research that's done on farms. Very excited to see the success of what these projects will propose and how we can take that data, gear it towards specific localities, and make sure that we can incorporate those practices, help us update our conservation practices, and make sure that we are being as current as we can. And very briefly, well, we're out of time, but there's more I can say, as you know, but we're limited on time. So.
Thank you so very much. And soil health is a tremendously important issue for so many of us here on this committee. I now recognize my colleague from South Dakota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last week, the Trump administration released the final Wotus rule, which I think will do a great deal to provide more regulatory certainty for landowners. It won't be any surprise to you, gentlemen, that this committee and its members get a lot of contacts from producers who are concerned about wetlands compliance violations. And of course, as you know, those violations can keep people from accessing programs in the future, and sometimes even requires a payback of past assistance provided. To what extent does USDA provide good guidance to producers who are trying to navigate the ambiguity surrounding waters of the U.S.?
Well, I'll say certainly as I've been chief the last year, being able to look at these wetlands compliance issues has been, again, a top priority, because in the past we've maybe had a culture that we were more enforcers instead of informers. And so we've really, my goal has been, how can we work with producers, treat them fairly, and address these needs? But it all comes down to making sure that our staff are properly trained and we're communicating that message to work hand in hand with our customers. So we've implemented several changes going forward, working with our state conservationists, making sure that we've got trainings. We've got a dedicated staff in many states where they do a lot of determinations, where that's all they do, focusing on wetland determinations. We've in the process of creating a national review cadre that before we would actually administer a ruling of a converted wetland, that this review team will look at over all of the documentation and paperwork to make sure we've got everything correct before issuing that conversion, because we want to make sure we got it right the first time. And so really it comes down to being able to have open communication, making sure that our staff is trained, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to treat the farmer fairly, making changes to the NAD process. There's been cases in the past 10 years where they would win an appeal, and then there would be another appeal and another appeal that we would keep coming back several times. Basically, after a second adverse determination, if the producer prevails, then we're going to back away. So I certainly understand that wetland compliance is a very sensitive issue. Our job is to make sure that we're making these determinations in a very fair way. Our staff, they understand they're making proper determinations, and that we're being able to convey that fairly to the producer. So rest assured, we will continue making progress in that area.
Well, and I apologize to go way back in history, but, if memory serves, the 96 Farm Bill provided for USDA to grant a certain number of, I think they were called limited effect exemptions.
Minimal effect, yes, sir.
Yeah, minimal effect. And so, to my knowledge, I don't think that rule was ever promulgated. Is that right?
That is correct, sir. We've done work when we look at minimal effects. We've actually made some progress to make those determinations, but you're right, that rule was never promulgated. I will say that we are definitely looking at making that happen this year. When I came on board as chief back a year ago, we were in the process of updating our interim rule for wetlands compliance and highly erodible land determinations. But the process had already passed as far as being able to make changes to that. That interim rule was released last, it's been many months ago now, and then we're in the process of posting a final rule. But to try to make a change to that interim rule would require public hearings, and we just can't do it. But we are committed as an agency to looking at being able to pick up the pieces again and try to go forward to rewrite the rules on this to make sure that we can have a chance to actually put that into regulation.
Well, I would just by way of closing, Madam Chair, thank this department, these agencies, the administration at large. I mean, clearly we all care about the environment. We care about conservation. We want to make sure that there is substantial and material compliance with the goals and the mission and the objectives of these great programs. I want to thank you all for really trying to focus on, compliance through education and through information, and not focusing quite so much on trying to catch people. I mean, ultimately, we're going to get a better environment, and we're going to get better conservation practices long term, I think, with the approach you're taking, both through rule and practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I now recognize my colleague from Iowa for an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I just want to touch base again about now incentivizing conservation practices. Pleased to hear there's some carryover funds, and I'm hoping we can get all of those out the door. I've heard from too many farmers in my district who absolutely want to participate in certain practices like cover crops, but they feel it's too expensive for them to get into. They don't have the support they need to afford it, especially when our overall farm economy is really suffering, and I'm sure you're fully aware that Iowa has the greatest farm debt right now. So we want folks to get into these practices, but they have a lot of debt. They don't know how they're going to be able to afford it. What sense do you have of the impact of these increased incentive payments for CSP? Do you think that they will really have an impact on application enrollment?
Incentive payments for EQIP, I'm sorry?
Yeah, for CSP, yeah, for EQIP, yeah, that absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I want to know what we can do to get more folks into these programs. They think that they can't afford them.
Absolutely. I think you're exactly right. So there's lots of things we can do, but certainly the enhanced payments will help. Certainly for a cover crop, being able to pay 150%, where we were paying 100% to pay these enhanced payment rates, I think will certainly help. But the best thing that we can do really is to continue to tell the story and have farmers share their successes. Farmers listen to farmers. And I've seen so many times across the Midwest where farmers will come and speak at certain events and share the successes they've had and how it has such a positive impact, not only on the environment, but on the bottom line. So definitely, I think we continue that outreach, continue having farmers tell their story, and at the same time, everything that we can do to help provide cost share money to producers to make sure they can take advantage of that. Within our interim farm bill rules that were released with EQIP, states can select a targeted resource area. Those areas that affect the biggest environmental threat that they determine, and within that, they can take certain practices and put an incentive payment on that as well. So if a certain area within the Chesapeake Bay watershed has been deemed that it's a priority area, they can pay more for some of these practices. And we also have what are called EQIP incentive contracts, which are brand new, which are like CSP, where farmers can actually be paid to actually experiment, if you will, and actually target some specific resource concerns that they have on a particular area without it being on the entire farm like traditional CSP works. They're longer contracts than typical EQIP, up to 10 years, and they'll be paid both on the improvement practice as well as the existing conservation efforts that they do. So part of our goal in creating these rules, A, is to streamline the process, but also give more flexibility to states and give more flexibility to producers to be able to take advantage of the programs we have to meet those resource concerns.
I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you think that Congress can be doing to incentivize the use of these programs? What are we missing out on?
Well, it all starts with money. You know, for example, with EQIP, we only are able to approve about 25% of all of our applicants. So it's, you know, it's $2 billion a year, but there is a greater demand. And so we do the best to deliver the program dollars that are allocated to us through Congress. But certainly I think the more opportunities we have with funding would be able to help more farmers put that conservation on the ground. I know we're not before the Appropriations Committee, but certainly dollars certainly drive action in many cases.
Okay, so am I hearing you correctly? So we've got excess revenue in some areas, and because we've got carryover, but we've got other areas we're not able to fulfill the request by as many people who would like it. Is there an option for us to be able to move some of these funds?
Well, for example, the carryover funds that we had in CSP, it's actually dictated in the law where that money needs to go. Mm-hmm. So as we shifted to the new dollar-based program, we're not going to have those carryover funds. Now, rest assured, those funds are still being delivered and administered to help producers. It's just limited to the uses that it can go to and the programs that it can fund. But the dollars are still being put on the ground. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Well, if there's any other ways that you can think of, I'll continue to push Congress to put more funding overall in the next Farm Bill. But let us know. We'd love to hear it.
Thank you.
As I would let you know that a couple of my farmers who I spoke with since we've had this trade war have said that the conservation practices have been very helpful with their bottom line during this downturn with the economy. You know, I didn't ask them, did it save you? Because that's not the case. But it's absolutely been a key player in helping them weather this downturn.
Thank you very much.
With the second round of questions completed and without objection, I'll do a brief third round, primarily because we were having such a good conversation related to soil health. And I'd like to begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes and allow Chief Lohr to continue his statements that he was making related to my question had been about soil health, what we've seen in Chesapeake Bay. And I'd like to give you a couple minutes to finish wrapping that up. And Administrator Fordyce, if you'd like to add anything, I invite you to do so as well.
Sure. Well, thank you. So what I was going to explain was how the states are now being able to set their own priority areas. And within those areas, they can put incentive payments on certain practices, up to 10 practices. I really think that's going to be very beneficial. Again, we're a locally led agency, but every state's different. Every state has different resource concerns. This will allow our states, through working with their state technical committees and their conservation districts, to see what needs that they have for that particular state and area. And as I was explaining as well with these incentive contracts as well, being able to give more flexibility to producers to be able to address soil health issues and concerns that they have. They're CSP-like contracts, but it does not have to cover the entire farming operation. They can be very prescriptive and specific over where they would like these practices to go. Plus, it gives them the flexibility. Maybe a farmer with cover crops wants to experiment planting cover crops or a certain mix on this particular land, and then the next year try over here so they can compare the difference. So it's not so prescriptive as some of the other contracts have to be. Just know that we believe strongly with soil health. We'll continue making that a priority, emphasizing that across our agency with our employees, the training that we do. And we have a soil health division within NRCS made up of experts around the country. In the past, they've primarily focused on external partners and producers and being able to go to various shows or workshops and present externally, but they're a great resource of information. We're going to try to steer them back a little more internally as well and have them do more training for our staff and employees to make sure that we feel like that our staff has the training that they need to be able to help our producers understand the importance of what soil health can mean to their operation.
Thank you. Administrator Fordyce.
Well, I feel like I need to say something. I think the chief is about, probably needs to take a drink. But so we're very anxious to roll out the pilot, the soil health income protection pilot. That we're very anxious to see what the results of that will be. So just very briefly, I think the intent of Congress was to roll out a pilot program that you could take lower producing soils, put a cover on them in shorter contract period, so 3 to 5 years. And I think at the end of that, determine if you've got improved soil health. Certainly, the chief has touched on it, and NRCS, works in this space every day. But when we talk to farmers, when I travel the country and talk to farmers about what's important to them, certainly the economics of the ag sector right now is top of mind. But certainly, how can we proactively improve soil health? And once we drive more adoption of soil health practices that improve that soil health and that soil structure, that profitability kind of follows. But it's almost, we've talked about incentives, we've talked about other things. It's almost a chicken or the egg kind of approach, because we know, my farm personally, we've been doing cover crops and investing in soil health, different types of technologies for 7 or 8 years, and we're seeing the results of that. And so I think it's incredibly important that that we continue to drive, incentivize, and promote soil health, not only as being the right thing to do, but also drives some economic benefits as well. I would like to just, one half of a minute, we talked about being able to get dollars out the door, and will we be able to spend the money in CRP, and I will just remind everyone that CRP has an acreage cap, not a dollar cap, so depending on what, once the offers come in and we set that bar, that will kind of drive what our investment is in CRP as opposed to having a dollar cap that limits us.
Thank you very much, Administrator Fordyce, and I'm excited about this pilot program. This subcommittee has held hearings related to soil health, and we've heard the chicken or the egg story from so many producers where they try it on one field and kind of tiptoe their way into the use of cover crops and other technologies. So this is pretty exciting, and I look forward to hearing about the success of this pilot. I now recognize my colleague from South Dakota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I was done, but then the discussion we're having prompted another question in my mind. Clearly very important. The conservation incentive payments, I think there is a lot of interest on the field. You mentioned talking to producers, Mr. Administrator. Some of them want to know how they can provide input. What's the best way? What should I tell them? If they want some input into what practices should be accepted, what guidance should I provide to them?
So, again, we have a network of 2,124 county offices, 51 state offices, and our state executive directors are incredibly engaged on a lot of different issues, from engaging in your part of the world with the late or the early fall storms and how we were engaging on services that we would provide. State executive directors in South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, kind of that area, we're heavily engaged in conversations about how can we interact. And this happens literally across the country, and a lot of times those state executive directors are engaged with long-standing issues that have existed for a long time, or things that have just presented themselves that are driven either by weather or certain things. But certainly great assets across the country in those state executive directors.
I could tell them to just go to their local FSA office, and they probably assume that, but are there any kind of working groups at a state-by-state level that are being formed that maybe they could volunteer for?
Yeah, State Technical Committee is more probably overseen by NRCS, but certainly a great opportunity from presenting ideas or concepts about, how to participate in different types of conservation programs.
But there's new mechanism being created specifically for the CIP.
So I will say, I can't speak for FSA, but on the NRCS side, we work very closely with our local conservation districts. Certainly, we encourage involvement in that. We have local working groups that meet to determine what the local needs are, and that all filters up to our state technical committee, as the administrator mentioned, that's made up of all kinds of partners, from FSA to producers to farm bureaus, and all of those groups that all come together. The state technical committees are led by our state conservationists. They meet quarterly, and they help shape and guide the direction of the state. So they're a very important part of that locally led process. So certainly with the producers you visit, ask them to visit with their local NRCS FSA office, ask about their local work groups, and that's what makes the process work. It's
Perfect, and the technical committee would be, ultimately might be a good venue for them to engage as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, are there any efforts being taken to make sure producers understand that their voices are desired in this process?
Absolutely. We, as the administrator said, at NRCS, we have public affairs specialists in every state that work very actively with all of their district offices through social media, through communication. It's a big part. We always stress, whenever I speak to groups, I stress the impact, the effects that every person has with their voice. We need them involved in telling the story, especially our soil health champions. I mean, farmers listen to farmers. So if we can get those folks willing to step up, take the microphone and tell their story, that impacts farmers more than someone working for the government. But you're exactly right, being able to let people know what options are out there and help them be able to see what can work on their farm.
Well, thank you, and please continue with that outreach. As you all know better than I do, engagement, there's almost no substitute for engagement to increase compliance and excitement and morale in the country, in the field about these programs. People will forgive you for the product, man, they never forgive you for the process. So as you continue moving forward, just engage the country as much as you can. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you again to our witnesses for being here today. Thank you for joining us. We've heard a lot of great themes related to engagement, engaging directly with the farmers and producers on the ground, ensuring there's ample staff to be able to do that. And I appreciate the update that you've given us on the programs and where they are and where they're going. As we talk about conservation and on-the-ground programs and their impact on everything from climate to the overall impact of productivity, we do navigate a lot of preconceived notions about what works and what doesn't. And the one thing that I like most about this committee is that we do focus on what works, and we hear from you all about the programs that are working and what they mean to the farmers and producers across this country. The Farm Bill is full of conservation programs that farmers and landowners can use to achieve their clean air, soil, and water goals and to optimize the productivity of their land. And they use these programs because they work and because they're based in science and because they're practical. And that doesn't mean there isn't room for us to do better, to scale up and to make changes, but we have to first think about what farmers on the ground will implement. And if a program is not put in place well or isn't well communicated, it faces challenges. And so in the interest of always working towards achieving these goals, I appreciate your attendance here today and your willingness to talk about how we're communicating some of these great programs out to the farmers and producers who use them. We can and we should aggressively pursue cleaner water, cleaner air, cleaner soils, and a more stable climate. And we have these good voluntary programs that do just that. They benefit soil health, they benefit overall output and overall profitability for our farmers and producers across the country. And we start by looking exactly at what the great work that farmers are doing through these conservation programs in the Farm Bill. And I appreciate your time here today. Thank you for participating in this hearing, and it's always good to see you all. We hope to have you back in coming months. And under the rules of this committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is adjourned.
Thank you.